Of all the archaeological sites in the world, why is Stonehenge so famous? What makes it so iconic? It's probably the most recognisable prehistoric site in the British Isles, but it's also an example of one of the most ancient human traditions from around the world. That being the building of earthwork structures to align with astronomy, like the solstices, for example. Let's break it down. Stonehenge is located 11 kilometres north of Salisbury in Wiltshire. Most of the site is actually a large circular earthwork known as a henge, with an opening avenue to the northeast. In the centre of the henge are the iconic megaliths, consisting of two kinds of stone, sarsens and bluestones, which form two horseshoe shapes with respective outer rings. At least they used to. Nowadays, most of the stones have fallen over. Besides that, the site contains a few more notable features. The heel stone in the northeastern avenue, the slaughter stone a bit closer in, two station stones and north and south barrows around the edge, and in the centre is the altar stone. There are also many different holes that have been dug across the site. All in all, there are over 50 stones at Stonehenge, with experts estimating there would have been as many as 80 in the past when the site was complete. In order to better understand Stonehenge, we first have to understand what a henge actually is. As I mentioned earlier, a henge is an earthwork, but more specifically it's defined as a mostly circular ditch surrounded by an embankment. So technically Stonehenge is closer to a reverse henge, which is ironic. But regardless of definitions, humans have been building these kinds of earthworks for a really long time, and seemingly all over the world, from the British Isles to the Amazon rainforest. What these structures are for depends on the site. A lot of the time we have no idea, which leads to most of them just being labelled as ritual, which is the case for Stonehenge. But what makes Stonehenge such an iconic site is the stones. It's not uncommon to find stone circles or even wooden posts inside henges, but besides their size, the stones at Stonehenge have a couple of interesting things about them. The sarsen stones in the centre are arranged into a horseshoe made up of 5 or so structures called trilithons, which are 2 blocks standing upright with a third sarsen lying horizontally on top called a lintel. The ring of sarsens surrounding the inner horseshoe are made of more vertical stones, with the lintels forming a continuous circle. Considering that each sarsen weighs on average 25 tons, that's pretty impressive. Something a bit unusual about the lintels and uprights is that they were carved to replicate a woodworking joint, specifically a mortise and tenon joint, which allows them to fit together kind of like Lego pieces. By all accounts this isn't needed though. The stones would be secure enough on their own, so the joints being there is interesting. Welsh bluestones make up the other stones in the centre, with each stone weighing much less than the sarsens, between 2 and 5 tons. They're called bluestones from the blue tinge they have when wet or freshly cut. Arguably the most significant stone in the entire site is the heel stone. It's this stone that acts as a marker for the solstices, and in the past would have been framed by 2 entrance stones. But now, only one of the entrance stones remains, the slaughter stone. It's worth mentioning the stone's got nothing to do with slaughter or murder or anything like that. It's just got that name because the stone's iron reacts with water, turning it a reddish brown colour. That coupled with the colourful imaginations of the Victorians thinking druids used it for sacrifices. Likewise, there seems to be no evidence that the altar stone was ever used as an altar. This megalith is a huge block of sandstone positioned in the centre underneath some fallen sarsens. We don't know what it was for, or even whether or not it was originally stood upright. At the edges of the site are the 2 station stones, but there's evidence to suggest that there used to be 4 stones forming a rectangle around the centre. The perfect orientation of this rectangle suggests a link to the solstices, and it's theorised they might even mark a lunar alignment. Another interesting thing about Stonehenge is its construction. It was built over a nearly 2,000-year period. For reference, it took an estimated 20 years to build one of the pyramids of Giza, which were built around the same time period as Stonehenge. But the reason it took so long to build Stonehenge was because it was built in stages. likely adapted and built upon by various different people groups between 5,000 and 3,500 years ago. The first phase of construction began around 5,000 years ago. In this stage, the earthwork was constructed, along with 56 small pits known as Aubrey holes, after John Aubrey. And it's thought that these were filled with timber posts. It's also likely the heel-stone was placed around the same time. Around 4,500 years ago is when we first see the iconic stone circle, although the exact arrangement of the stones would have looked a bit different. The station and entrance stones were also placed during this phase, and over the next 200 to 300 years, the central stones were rearranged several times. The last phase of construction that went on at Stonehenge was the digging of 2 concentric rings of holes surrounding the stones, which have been radiocarbon dated to between 3,800 and 3,500 years ago. These holes are known as the Y and Z holes, and they seem to be from an unfinished project to rearrange or add stones, but we don't know for sure. One of the most puzzling aspects of Stonehenge is how the stones actually got there. In fact, people have been wondering this for hundreds of years, and there's been all sorts of explanations. 12th century cleric Geoffrey of Monmouth chronicled the legend that the mythical wizard Merlin was responsible for moving the stones. The story was that the stone circle was originally built by giants in Ireland, and Merlin used his magic to take it to England to serve as a memorial for fallen Britons who lost their lives in a battle against the Saxons. Unfortunately, experts don't tend to agree with this theory. The Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles northeast of Stonehenge, is most likely where the Saracens came from. Moving stones that each weigh the same as 5 African elephants that distance is very impressive, but by no means impossible. The bluestones, however, pose more of a challenge. They seem to originate from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, over 150 miles away. And considering Stonehenge was built before the invention of the wheel in Western Europe, that's pretty incredible. One interesting theory that's been put forward is the glacial theory, which suggests that the stones were carried within glaciers from Wales to somewhere closer to the site, where the ice melted, leaving the stones behind. There is a precedent for this. Glaciers frequently carry enormous stones locked in the ice, and end up transporting them hundreds of miles away. And these out-of-place stones are known as glacial erratics. This is a reason why you sometimes find non-native stones in seemingly random places. However, there are a few flaws with the glacial theory, so most archaeologists don't think the stones were transported this way. It's widely agreed that the stones were transported by human hands, possibly using log rollers or wicker baskets. Maybe the stones were even floated along stretches of water in specialised rafts. So apologies to all you conspiracy theorists out there, but Stonehenge was not built by aliens. The other big mystery is we still don't really know why it was built. What did it mean to those who built it? What purpose did it serve? It's long known that Stonehenge is an astronomical marker, aligned to the sunrise on the solstices. On the summer solstice, the sun rises to the northeast, so if you stand in the centre looking towards the northeast, the rising sun aligns with the heelstone. And at dawn on the winter solstice, the inverse is the case, so looking towards the centre from the heelstone, the sun is framed within the central sarsens. Celebrating the solstices is something humans all over the world have done for thousands of years, and having an awareness of these things was hugely useful for agriculture and navigating the seasons. Potentially there are other astronomical alignments at Stonehenge as well. I've already mentioned the theory that the station stones could mark a lunar alignment, but that's yet to be proven. In the 60s, astronomer Gerald Hawkins proposed a theory that Stonehenge was in fact a calendar, one that was even capable of predicting eclipses, but the archaeological community has remained sceptical of this hypothesis. Although the possibility of there being undiscovered astronomical alignments isn't unlikely. English Heritage actually created a website that gives a 360-degree live view from the centre of Stonehenge, so you can experience all the alignments online. I've dropped a link to the website in the description below the video. So whatever the site was originally used for, it was probably linked to these alignments. It's pretty clear that the people who built Stonehenge saw it as somewhere very special, so it was most likely used for religious ceremonies or other important rituals. But what exactly these rituals looked like would have varied depending on the time. In the past, people had the idea that Stonehenge was built and used by druids for ritual sacrifices, but there's been no evidence to suggest any human sacrifices ever took place, and the construction of the site long predates the druids anyway. Stonehenge does, however, contain many buried cremation remains. About 64 cremations have been found, leading experts to estimate that as many as 150 individuals were originally buried at the site. This makes it the largest burial ground in the British Isles from the late Neolithic period. Many of the other Neolithic sites in the surrounding area are also burial sites. We know very little about the original builders, but some clues to why Stonehenge was built where it is lie in the area's geography. 5,000 years ago, the English landscape looked very different. Much of the land was covered in forest, but Stonehenge is located on chalk downs, which would have been a much more open landscape than its surroundings, which makes sense of why so many Neolithic sites, including Stonehenge, were built there. Since building stopped over 3,000 years ago, bits of the site have fallen down, and stones have gone missing. But despite everything, Stonehenge has remained more or less together. It saw the Romans invade and then leave, it was around through the Black Death, and survived 2 world wars. Today, Stonehenge is a protected site, attracting millions of visitors every year. And on the solstices, thousands of people gather at the site to celebrate the sunrise. In doing so, they participate in one of the most ancient human traditions, connecting the ancient past with the present day. All because of some stones and an odd-shaped ditch. And that's pretty neat.